At first glance, the house seemed like any other in the quiet, well-kept suburban neighborhood. Its white picket fence, manicured lawn, and neatly trimmed hedges gave off an aura of warmth and family. The residents, a seemingly ordinary couple with two children, were well liked by their neighbors. The children played outside on weekends, laughing and running down the tree-lined street. The parents were friendly, often attending neighborhood barbecues and taking part in community events. Nothing about the house suggested anything unusual until the whispers began. It started with small things. Neighbors noticed odd behavior from the family, especially late at night. The lights would flicker on and off in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate, as though someone was moving from room to room in a hurry. Occasionally, they would hear strange noises coming from within the house, low murmurs and thumps that no one could explain. Some thought it was just the creaks and groans of an old house, but as time went on, the occurrences grew more unsettling. One evening, the family simply vanished. No warning, no note, just an empty house and unanswered phone calls. The children's toys were left scattered across the yard, and the car sat in the driveway as if they had stepped out for just a moment. The neighbors were shocked. Everyone had seen the family just the day before, laughing and going about their normal routines. No one suspected anything was wrong. The disappearance caught the attention of local authorities, who arrived to investigate. They quickly realized that something wasn't right. The house seemed too still, too silent. It was as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, hiding the truth behind them. The investigation would soon reveal that what lay within the house's walls was far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. When the authorities arrived at the house, the air was thick with an eerie stillness. The front door was unlocked, yet there was no sign of forced entry. Inside, everything appeared normal at first. Too normal. The living room was neatly arranged, with family photos hanging on the walls, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee still lingered in the air. The detectives felt an unsettling sense of calm, almost as if the family had simply stepped out for a moment and would return soon. But as they moved deeper into the house, something felt off. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the walls. The atmosphere was heavy, almost oppressive. In the kitchen, the cupboards were stocked with half-empty jars, as though they had been preparing a meal earlier that day. Yet, there was no food on the table. The silence was deafening. The basement door, tucked away in the corner of the hallway, stood slightly ajar. The detectives hesitated for a moment before descending the stairs. As they reached the bottom, a powerful foul smell hit them, almost making them gag. It wasn't the usual damp or musty odor one might expect from a basement. This stench was thick and suffocating, as if something was rotting beneath the surface. The detectives cautiously explored the dimly lit room, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. They found nothing out of the ordinary at first, just old furniture, boxes, and forgotten items. But then, as they pulled aside a stack of boxes, something caught their eye. Strange symbols were carved into the walls. It was as if someone had been trying to communicate something, but the meaning was unclear. The deeper they searched, the more they uncovered. Hidden marks, remnants of something they couldn't yet understand, and a growing sense that this house held far more than just the memory of a missing family. Something darker was buried here, waiting to be uncovered. As the detectives continued their search of the basement, they stumbled upon a hidden door at the back, cleverly concealed behind a wall of shelves. The door was old, its frame warped by years of neglect, but the thick, musty air behind it told them this was no ordinary room. When they pried it open, the overwhelming stench intensified, nearly suffocating them. It was a mixture of decay, mildew, and something far more sinister. The room was small, with low ceilings, and the air felt unnaturally stagnant, as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. Inside, the detectives were met with a sight that made their stomachs turn. The walls were lined with photographs, some framed, some taped hastily, showing various people, all of whom appeared to have been taken without their consent. The faces of the victims were marked with disturbing symbols, almost as if they had been part of some ritual. The photos seemed to go on forever, covering every inch of the room, yet each one left the detectives more unsettled than the last. What could this mean? Was this some sort of twisted collection? As they moved further into the room, they noticed something far worse. The floor was covered in grime and stained with dark, dried patches, clear signs of something horrific having occurred. In one corner, an old mattress lay abandoned, its fabric torn and stained beyond recognition. There were also numerous items scattered around: dirty clothes, remnants of food, and empty bottles of what appeared to be some kind of chemical. A large wooden chest stood against the far wall, its lid half open, revealing a glimpse of something hidden inside. The detectives hesitated before approaching the chest, their hands shaking slightly as they reached for it. When they opened it, their worst fears were realized. Inside were remains, human remains. Not just one or two, but enough to make even the most hardened officers recoil. The discovery was a chilling confirmation. This house had been the site of unimaginable horrors. The true scope of the crimes that had been committed here was beginning to unfold, but the detectives could hardly stomach the depth of darkness they had uncovered. As the investigation progressed, the detectives began to piece together a terrifying history behind the house, one that stretched back further than anyone had anticipated. They started with the man who had lived there before the current family, a man named Richard Blackwell. On the surface, Richard appeared to be just another quiet resident of the neighborhood, someone who kept to himself and never raised suspicion. But as they dug deeper, they discovered a much darker past. Richard had been a well-respected member of the community, known for his charm and charisma, but his private life told a different story. Several neighbors recalled seeing Richard in the company of strangers, people who didn't belong in the neighborhood. They were always fleeting visits, quick in and out interactions that seemed almost too secretive. One neighbor, an elderly woman who had lived on the street for decades, even mentioned seeing him leave the house late at night with large bags that appeared to be too heavy for him to carry alone. She had thought little of it at the time, dismissing it as the actions of a man who worked odd hours. But now, with the grisly discoveries inside the house, her memory began to haunt her. Further investigation revealed that Richard had a history of mental instability. He had been involved in several incidents over the years, all of which had been swept under the rug. Neighbors recalled hearing strange noises coming from the house, sounds of shouting and crying, but no one had ever gone to check. He had kept to himself, isolating his family from the outside world. As the detectives traced Richard's history, they discovered disturbing connections to several cold cases of missing persons. His sudden disappearance years ago now made sense. It wasn't voluntary. Richard had been caught, but someone had ensured that he was silenced before he could reveal the true horrors of what had happened in that house. Now, the detectives understood the house had been more than just a home. It had been a hideout for unspeakable crimes, and Richard had been its twisted architect. The truth was far darker than anyone could have imagined. As the house was demolished, the community attempted to move forward, but the impact of the horrific discoveries lingered like a shadow over their once peaceful neighborhood. The memory of what had transpired within those walls haunted everyone involved in the investigation. For the detectives who had uncovered the grisly truth, the images of the hidden room, the photographs, and the remains were seared into their minds. The horrors they had witnessed refused to leave them, no matter how hard they tried to push them away. Many of them struggled with sleepless nights, unable to shake the disturbing thoughts of what they had uncovered. While the house was reduced to rubble, the investigation continued. But even as they uncovered more evidence linking Richard Blackwell to a series of unsolved disappearances, something still felt off. The detectives couldn't escape the nagging question. How many more victims had been silenced, their stories hidden forever in the walls of other houses? The true extent of Richard's crimes was still unclear, and the mystery surrounding his connections to other missing persons cases only deepened. They had found some answers, but they were left with more questions than ever. In the wake of the investigation, the neighborhood's sense of security was shattered. Families who had once trusted their neighbors now looked at each other with suspicion, wondering if anyone else had dark secrets lurking behind closed doors. The sense of safety they had taken for granted was gone. Even the most ordinary-looking homes now seemed to hide unknown horrors. As for the detectives, Their lives were forever changed. Some sought therapy, others chose to leave the force altogether, unable to live with the memories of what they had witnessed. And while justice had been served to some degree, the legacy of fear remained. The house that once seemed so harmless had exposed the truth. Sometimes the most terrifying secrets are the ones hidden in plain sight. The question lingered: what other dark legacies were left behind, waiting to be uncovered?